Hey, this is David Wolinsky back with another interview from the audio archives of Don't Die. This time I'm bringing to you the second half of my Q&A with Owen Deery, who's a game developer based out of Ottawa, Canada. We talked on July 2nd, 2017. And just a quick reminder, if you'd like to read transcripts of other interviews I've been doing the last few years, you can hop on over to nodon'tdie.com. You'll also see a link to my Patreon, where your support helps me continue this independent reporting and exploring that I've been doing. And now, here's Owen Deery.
Well, it's funny because I think, a few decades ago, it wasn't that long ago, I've been thinking about this lately, it felt like there was a period of time where no one knew what a video game was. They didn't really, it wasn't as codified as it seems to be. Like today, there just seems to be this sort of singular story that so many people have internalized. What do you feel has sort of been left out or sort of clamped down on or shouted over by this sort of, calcified mentality of, oh, well, this is just what a video game is and this is what video games are supposed to do?
Could you be more specific on what you mean by that?
I could try. I'll see. I think, like you mentioned, Atari, and I think in that era there was no prevailing rules of thumb or best practices. They were kind of just making it up as they go along, and as games became an industry and it became more corporatized and more focused on being more commercial, it became a lot more creatively conservative, at least at sort of the bigger companies. And so I guess I'm curious, what you feel like. What do people seem less willing to be experimental about today when it comes to video games?
I think one of the big ones right now is length, like in terms of playtime for a game, because I think a lot of developers, myself included, my game is pretty short. They actually have to defend the length of their games from reviews on Steam saying, oh, this game was only 2 hours long, not worth your money, thumbs down. Whereas another bizarre thing is people reviewing games based on the size of the game, like the actual number of megabytes, which is ridiculous. I've seen people make reviews like, this game is less than a gigabyte in size. How is this worth your money? No stars. And
you're talking about on
Steam? Yeah. And it's like, it's such a, it feels like such a perverse way of trying to define the value of something. And it's like,
I have seen some of that. I'm thinking. I think I remember it specifically on No Man's Sky, where people were upset for any number of reasons. We don't have to get into any of that, but I do remember seeing one person tweeting they were upset that it didn't have enough megabytes. So how could it be?
Yeah, it's like taking the this game isn't long enough parameter and just taking it to the strangest extreme possible.
I guess it's like saying, how could this book or movie be any good because it doesn't have enough words
exactly.
in it. Or enough scenes or whatever.
Yeah, precisely. Yeah. And so I think there's a lot of independent developers who I think are trying to push back on that and be like, this is the price of the game for the experience that I created. The time it takes is basically irrelevant as long as you enjoy yourself.
Yeah.
But that's a very difficult thing, I think, to sell to an audience who are basically trying to find something. It's like, what can entertain me the most for my money for this amount of time?
Do you feel like the media or critics are a good ally on that front, on communicating that message? I don't know that it's even a thing that everyone has to be on the same team, quote unquote, about. But I've seen this sort of weird. It's sort of almost a childish thing where if you buy it and you got enjoyment out of it, then I think it's worth it. Whether you spend a nickel on it or $50. But do you feel like is the media helping support that?
I think in general the media is definitely on the side of the developers in this case. I've never seen like a legitimate review or media coverage that sort of dives into, oh, this game was too short or it's not big enough, because it definitely feels like sort of a childish thing to worry about or complain about. But yeah, no, I don't think the media is encouraging it at all, which is, it's nice to see.
Yeah, I mean, you mentioned another thing about game criticism that I think you touched on this thing where there's almost like an omniscience that seems to be persistent in games criticism. I'll quote you back to you if that's not too weird. You said, when a writer has an issue with a certain part of a game, they often treat it like a bug or mistake that was made rather than an intentional decision. It would be really strange to read a movie review where the author says, I think the lighting rig in this one scene is broken. Didn't look the way I've come to expect movie lighting to look. I mean, it's interesting because I feel like a lot of video game culture in the industry is sort of obsessed with outdoing Hollywood. So, I mean, why do you think they didn't absorb that? Why do you think this is a thing that sort of is manifested in game criticism uniquely?
Yeah, I'm not sure. I guess because it could be the fact that games are software, whereas movies are sort of a more passive experience. Like, you're not going to find a bug in a movie. And I think in the same answer that I wrote to you, I mentioned about how reviews are sort of like, it's like a movie review, but also like a list of software bugs at the same time, mixed together. And software bugs are basically objective. Like, right, the game crashed, or it didn't load, or it corrupted my save game. Like, that's a bug by far. But sort of when you combine them together, like the creative aspects and the search for these errors in the game, you get these judgments that are among the lines of, this creative decision is not what I would expect it to be, so it is a fault. You know? And that's I think that's all I can say on that.
That's okay. Well, I mean, I don't know. I always wonder about, comparing them to movies or something else, because, I mean, comparatively speaking, games are still pretty young, and I think they're still, like, only now or recently, they're getting to a point where they're sort of rediscovering themselves. They're sort of refiguring out what they want to be. I mean, you said that, it's all a continuum of creation and art and entertainment, and, new stuff doesn't need to travel along the same path as old stuff. Are there other ways that you see people sort of trying to stuff video games into old paths, whether it's media or publishers or whoever? I mean, what do you feel you see the most like that?
I guess there seem to be a lot of remasters and remakes recently, which I've seen, and that reminds me a lot of movies, which even movies they're seeing way more of that recently, just because they need a hook that people know at this point to sell tickets to movies, and I think they're sort of doing the same thing with games now. That's why Call of Duty is still going, because people know it, and so it's like, bam, there's 50% of your marketing is done already because people know what Call of Duty is. Which I guess is more of a marketing thing rather than sort of an entertainment continuum thing, but yeah.
Right, or a medium thing. Yeah.
Yeah.
I mean, do you think that there's a lot of, well,
so I was just going to say, like a couple of years ago when they were trying to do a lot of episodic stuff, I know there's a couple of companies still trying to do episodic games, which I guess was sort of trying to borrow some stuff from television entertainment to try and see if they could do sort of more discrete chunks of a story in different pieces. But I think it's really difficult to fit that sort of workflow into how games are made, which is why I think a lot of it didn't actually take off.
Yeah, I mean, I don't know how much of those you play, but it's been interesting because I think that's a thing that's really happened in the last decade or so, and now now it's being conflated even more, where the sort of bigger push episodic things are literally just movie or TV properties, just now as a game, which is not at all new, and that's there were tons of games about movies in the 80s. But I mean, I don't know. I mean, does that matter? I mean, do you feel like? I mean, does it feel like it measurably stymies the growth of other things, or it may just stymie things in the sense that it, it spreads attention elsewhere instead of looking forward. I mean, I don't even know if people really know.
Yeah, it's just
because it's such an iterative thing. Who's to say what forward is?
Yeah, it feels like an odd way to go about things, like trying to force games down a path which television or movies took is weird in the first place, but also the fact that path doesn't even work for movies and television anymore. Right. It's like let games do their own thing. They're constantly seem to be coming up with these new ways of presenting games to you, and then people are trying to be like, oh, but more like movies, make it more like a movie. It seems like just let it do its own thing. The age that we live in is so insane and so fast, and everything is moving so quickly. Just let it blossom on its own, let it become its own thing. It doesn't have to be a movie. Movies are very, very old, and video games are quite new. It feels really weird to try and push them through the same pipe.
Well, so I mean, I really had meant to go and read more of the press that you did for the game that you released. I mean, talking more broadly about just the media in general, I mean, something that you said is that you wish it was easier for people who want to sell their games to be more honest. And it sounded like you talked about a difficulty to not be sort of salesy and to be a little bit more, open about, your feelings about your game. And that, I mean, I guess, can you talk a little bit about, like, why did you sort of struggle with being honest, at least according to your own rubric, in your media pushes?
I think it sort of all stems from the fact that mainly I'm just trying to make art and be creative in the way I want to be, but then also I'm trying to survive and make money doing that. And those two often are in direct opposition to each other, which is really tough. So it's like, here's this art that I made. I feel really strongly about it. It's like my creative energy has been directly infused into this thing, and I'm super proud of it. And then you have to go and do an interview and convince people to give you money for it. It feels, it's just very dissonant. But I mean, you still have to do it, unfortunately. Which is why I'm really happy that I got a chance to do an interview like this, because this is like the opposite of salesy. We're just discussing games themselves rather than me saying, like, oh yeah, my game came out, you should, it's on sale, you should go buy it, these are the platforms it's on. Yeah,
that was another reason that I waited a while.
Yeah, I think that was smart.
Well, just so that you would have the benefit of, re-review, and I had no idea how much we were going to talk about it, but I mean, what did people who interviewed you tend to fixate on or ask about? Was it things you expected them to ask about?
Yeah, it was pretty varied. Like, some people asked me sort of about like environmentalist ideas that I put into the game, and sort of the post-apocalyptic ideas that I put into the game, and the nostalgia, and sort of the sort of dangers of VR that a lot of people saw in the game. So there was a pretty varied range of questions that I got about it, which was super interesting. I was worried that people would just be like, "So tapes are crazy, right?" But in general, there were some pretty interesting questions.
I mean, did Sony or Adult Swim sort of talk to you about, like, how to handle interviews or do anything close to media coaching?
No, not at all, actually. And that's sort of another part of them just giving you free reign to do your own thing. And also at the same time, like, they're just taking on a lot of indie developers, so they don't have the time to dedicate to each individual team, And it's not like a traditional publisher for a AAA game where there's a ton of oversight and there's people checking in every day and there's producers flying in to the studio to see how things are progressing. It was, just every now and then touch base to see how the game is coming along, see if there's anything we need to organize, and then say, okay, that's cool, we'll talk again next week. And then I just go back to working on the game or doing press. So I mean, there was definitely a lot of freedom to speak about the game the way I wanted to, which was nice. But again, there's such an impulse to just sell it,
I mean, I know a number of other small developer teams who, similar to you, are going all in and are taking other jobs and doing other things so that they can do this. I just talked to one of them a few weeks ago, just on the phone, just started catching up, having not for the site or anything, just started catching up and talking about stuff. And what I hear frequently from teams like that is that there's a trepidation almost in doing press or talking to the media. Because, I think you touched on this a little bit, that just sort of this tendency for almost like anger baiting online, which I don't think is unique to video games, but there's sort of a reluctance to, I think it's like you said, you have to do it, but there's sort of a fearfulness of not knowing, in what context the things that they say are going to be used, what some of the blowback might be, but on the other hand, it's sort of one of the best ways to help direct traffic to, the fact that their game is for sale, or that they have some sort of other milestone. When did you sort of notice the rise of that sort of anger baiting in games media? It happened to me actually early in development. After I announced I was coming out on PlayStation, I did. Oh, so you actually got to
it was very low level, but it sort of caught me off guard because before that I hadn't done a lot of press because a lot of the stuff I was making was pretty low level stuff and didn't have a lot of press associated with it. So I did this interview with a small website, and they asked me why it was coming out on PlayStation and not Xbox. And I said, oh, well, I talked to both of them, and PlayStation just got back to me first, and so I went with PlayStation, and I thought that was it. And then when they ended up printing the article, they basically used that as a headline, like Xbox refused to put small radios on their platform, and they made that the central part of the article, and Microsoft ended up calling me because, literally within the hour of the article going up, I got a call from ID at Xbox and what can we do? Can we send you dev kits? And I was just like, oh, I'm so sorry. I didn't mean to badmouth you guys. It was the most innocent answer. But this site, they were just like, oh yeah, we can make a story out of this. And I think after that I became a lot more guarded in the sort of responses I gave in reference to questions like that. So now I basically just have to say no, I'm not really talking about other platforms right now.
Really, they call it. They were that on top of it.
Yeah, it's really. Huh? I found it's really rare to get actual telephone calls, on your telephone when you're working in games or tech, and that was one of the few times where I got a phone call on my phone.
That's weird. I had a thing. With a previous interview where I spoke to someone who used to work for Rockstars, and they're not even in the industry anymore, and they had moved across the country to the West Coast, and it was a similar kind of thing where within an hour I was getting threats that I needed to take the interview down, but even though they really had no basis or merit to that request.
So Rockstar?
Yeah, I've had my share of these things too, but it's the same kind of thing where within the hour it happened, which I find so interesting because a major catalyst for this project was just sort of Gamergate and just sort of looking at the way that there really was no responding at all at first. So yeah, I don't know. I don't really have a question to drive that to, but that is awkward that they
they were super nice, and I think they understood what the site had done as well. They were like, yeah, that site, they write a lot of articles like that, but I think they just wanted to sort of make amends, quote unquote, just to be like, we're cool, right? You don't have hard feelings against Microsoft. I'm like, absolutely not. No, not at all.
Yeah. Well, I don't know. I just have a couple more questions here. I did notice also on this survey here, the Adam Saltzman thing, someone, there's like a final section that just said, anything else that you don't leave a comment on. And someone said that, I'll just quote from them. They just, I wish we'd stop focusing on the luckiest 1 to 5% of creators when we talk about how to make all this work. And I do wonder about that there has sort of come to be this sort of cult of personality that has sort of come about in independent development. Are there aspects of the work? I don't know if you agree with that.
I would absolutely agree with that. There's a huge survivorship bias in terms of the stories that you hear and the companies that you hear about.
Yeah. Well, that's what I was curious about. Is just like, are there aspects of the work and life that you notice that they don't talk about, or that they try to sort of, minimize?
Well, I think there's one thing that they don't really mention, but I think it's sort of known amongst game developers that it's part of it, is that there's a huge amount of luck involved. Like, if you go to GDC and see a talk by someone who's like, here's how I made my game, and here's how it was a huge success, and here's how I did it. It's basically like, that talk is useful for them 5 years ago, right? If they'd seen themselves do that talk, right, they would be able to use all the information in it. For everyone else there, it's sort of just an anecdote to observe. It's not like you can write down any of this information and then it'll work for you, because it's
right. It's not
just like, oh, that's an interesting story. You found success by doing these things. Good to know, but it's not sort of informative, and it should almost be like a note at the beginning of every presentation. It's like, this worked for me. This will probably never work again for anybody else.
That's true. I've come to just sort of feel that way about GDC in general. Certainly there are exceptions, and there's great panels, and there's other benefits to just bringing together in the meet space, just the ability to pinball into other people you didn't expect to meet and have conversations that way. But something that I've heard. Well, I don't know. Do you think that? I don't know that I like asking about this stuff, because it's like sort of speculating on the way other people present themselves. But maybe you can sort of glean this. What do you feel sort of that for that 1 to 5%? Like, what does their success seem to be built on? Like, sort of, why are they able to be successful? You mentioned luck, but maybe more specifically, luck as far as what?
I don't know. Like, there's definitely something to be said for the sort of 5 years, maybe before and after Indie Game the movie came out, where if you made a game that had like even a little bit of quality, you were generally guaranteed to have some sort of success. Like, if Super Meat Boy is a really good game, but if it came out today, it would probably get lost in Steam, right? It's a really good game, and it looks really cool, and I still play that game because it's a lot of fun. But like a 2D platformer coming out in 2017, it's like no one's going to pay any attention to it. And so there's something to be said for just making the right game at the right time.
What do you think that hinges on? Obviously, it needs to have some sort of it needs to have something zeitgeisty about it. But I don't really know what the zeitgeist hinges on, because it doesn't seem like it. Although I agree with you completely. I think if that game came out today, it's a good game, but I do think it would get buried and it would have difficulty standing out, because look at the game and look at what it is. But what do you think sort of defines that je ne sais quoi of those games that are able to sort of capture? Because it seems like a thing for a while was things that are also described Super Meat Boy, which is sort of trying to pull at nostalgic heartstrings. I struggle to think of what else. There seem to be some people who are able to sort of capture a certain amount of media attention just by virtue of either being themselves or playing up certain parts of their personality, and then by virtue of that, people are interested in the games they make. But I'm trying to figure this out too. I don't know if there's really any sort of, of course not. There's no like commonality or predictability to that zeitgeist. But at the same time, I'm starting to question, whether social media is more influential than media outlets. Maybe they only work in tandem. I don't really know what gets to define the zeitgeist.
I think it's just another arm of the video games are unbelievably complicated trait, you know? As far as like what will make the game successful, you got the art style and the type of game, how difficult it is, what sort of audience you're going for, is it really streamable, which is huge these days. Small radios is not very streamable at all. So like if you were to focus on that, you'd probably get a way larger audience. But I mean,
I think there's also like what else is going on.
Oh,
in the
absolutely,
world
yeah.
Might be a small sort of subconscious.
Yeah, there's just
factor.
all these little sort of analog factors that don't have set answers to them, and sometimes you get enough of them right that the game takes a hold of people and it resonates, and then you find success. But at the same time, you hear about some developers who approach it really methodically and say like, okay, what art style will people like? What kind of game is selling well on Steam? How can I make this game as streamable as possible?
But do you feel things like that? Sorry to interrupt. Do you feel things like that? Are they also similar to business plans? They're going to be expired by the end of the calendar
absolutely,
year?
I agree. And I don't think it's a great road to go down in terms of making games, because it's basically like it removes. It's the opposite approach to making the game that you want to make, right? So I made the game that I wanted to make, but someone taking the opposite approach would be like, okay, I'm going to make the game that I think people will want the most. You know?
Yeah. Yeah, no, I know. I mean, I used to teach comedy writing at Second City, and I used to always tell my students, you know, like, who are you? I basically just would walk them through the realization that when you try to make a thing for a imaginary mental picture of a fictional person, I mean, it's, you know, you're trying to hit a moving target while you're blindfolded versus like, what are the things that you like? But I think, you know, there are different types of creative, you know, mojo in people, and some people are driven to do that, and I think we all benefit from all those different approaches. But I do think deep down we know the things that interest us. But you know, something else I have heard is that, you know, that 1 to 5%, you know, because they are lucky, that there can be a tendency to sort of think that they know better than others. And something that I've heard from some of the developers I've met through this project is that, you know, some of that 1 to 5% will sort of reach out to give unsolicited feedback or thoughts on ways to improve their game or their message. Is that a thing that you experience?
No, not personally. No, I haven't had an experience with that. But there is something to be said for someone, even if luck was a huge part of their success, to have reached that level in the games entertainment business. They will have certain knowledge that is hard to accrue as someone who's just getting started or who hasn't had a breakthrough or anything yet. You know, like just
as far as I mean, I know that's a hard thing to quantify, but I have not really.
Yeah, well, this sort of goes back to
so I think you might
like know. If we were to have done this interview 2 years ago when I just started the game versus now having released it. Like my perspective on the whole game development process is entirely different, because I know all the things that I did horribly wrong and how I would do them in the future. And that's the sort of stuff that you can't sort of read a book about. You know, you have to live it for 2.5 years, and you have to experience the pain of your mistakes. And I think it's probably just a part of the game development community to want to let others know what happened to you and be like, you can maybe avoid this if you listen to what I did, you know? So I don't think there's anything sort of like high and mighty about it. I think it's just like, there's a lot of mistakes to be made, especially if you don't know what you're doing. Here are some tips, you know?
Well, and I think it's like you said, I think even if that knowledge is floating out there, someone in your position wouldn't know is that is your blind spot, because at that time it's your blind spot, and also you don't know what your problems are going to be, which is just sort of a human nature kind of thing. So I got very existential for you in the beginning. I'll get very existential for you again now. I mean, what's a sort of success for you as a person making games look like? I mean, is it sort of the more traditional, you know, having a certain amount of money and being able to focus on it, you know, purely full time, or does success for you making games look, or what does that look or feel like? Or
yeah, I would say success for me is the general, have enough income so that I can support myself. I can keep my family fed and clothed, and just make the stuff that I want to, because I've spent the past 6 months working on a contract full time and then trying to work on projects in my spare time, and it's unbelievably difficult,
Right.
It's like, I don't think if I were to work on it part time, I would be in the position to finish sort of projects that I'd like to make, because they sort of require that full time engagement. And so ideally, I just want to be able to work on the stuff I want to comfortably.
If you just been getting no sleep?
Yeah, sort of a little bit. What I've been doing is going in crazy early to the office, because it's an open office, and so when no one is there for like the first 2 hours in the morning, I get a bunch of work done, and then means I can leave at 3:00 and just work basically from then until I go to bed.
No, I had noticed when we had started to accelerate our emails, no matter what time of day I had emailed you, you were...
Oh, yeah, for sure.
You were there. So, I mean, I understood what was going on. This is sort of anticlimactic to ask this as the second to last question, and I meant to, but I think you may have already touched this. Maybe I asked this more from a different perspective, but, talking about other developers, I mean, are there things that you find developers tend to assume about you or your projects after or because you have gotten media coverage, or because you worked with a publisher? So more specifically, other developers. No,
I don't think so. I think in general, I think the developers that I know, they generally understand the flow of things. They know that coverage doesn't necessarily mean huge success, or like just because you've seen a link to my game on Rock Paper Shotgun doesn't mean I'm like rolling in money.
I've been written about by them too. I can confirm. I can confirm the same thing. Yeah, I think these things are very difficult to quantify.
Yeah, people get excited about the weirdest things. Like one time I went to our local game development meetup, and a guy I had never met before came up to me and he's like, "Hey, you're the guy that Brandon Boyer retweeted yesterday." I'm like, "What the fuck? Is that a thing that people pay attention to?" It's super bizarre. Because it's one thing to have like an article and someone noticed that. Like, having people say, "Hey, I saw your interview on this site. It was really cool." I'm like, "All right, that's awesome." But to have one specific retweet by one person and someone notice that and then like sort of compliment you on it is a really bizarre thing to have happen.
I think that's, to me, sorry. You're not boring me, sorry. It's an oxygen thing, not a tired thing. I think to me that is sort of the weird thing about the concept of the video game community is, I mean, a lot of it is on screens, a lot of it is asynchronous, a lot of it, can be impersonal, even when it is sort of in a, streaming context where, someone else you don't know may have tried, for their own purposes or doing a thing that may impact you. I mean, there are so many qualifiers I just put on the ways that, you, without even being present there, like a streamer may have impacted you, or you didn't even see the tweet, someone else told you about it. And it sounds like up where you are, there's a little bit more of a physical world community, but is there anything strange or that you feel feels incomplete about the way people talk about or try to allege that there is like this sort of ephemeral video game community that exists, that we all hang out on screens together but we never really see each other? I guess what feels weird to you about sort of alleging that this is sort of a huge community?
Yeah,
you and I have never spoken before today.
Yeah, I honestly have a problem with that, because I'm a pretty unsocial guy. I'm pretty introverted, so I have a hard time communicating with people face to face. Doing stuff on Twitter and on Slack and through email, it really works well for me. But I know a lot of people in the game community who are really active on Twitter and on the internet, and then they go to GDC and they have all these friends and they love hanging out with them, and they act like they've known each other forever. And I'm really impressed by that. I'm a little bit jealous from that, because I'm like, oh man, they connected so easily, and it's something that I could never do just because it's not in my personality. So to me personally, that's something that I feel disconnected from the community overall. But it's not just me. Like, I've seen a lot of people have the similar issue, but I've also seen a lot of people who are able to just dive right into face-to-face relationships readily. So
yeah. Well, I have just one last question here for you, unless there's something else you wanted to make sure that we touched on or ask about or talk about.
No, I think we covered everything I was interested in.
Cool. Okay. Well, you've seen this question in other interviews. This is about as existential as they get. What do you feel video games have accomplished?
Deep breath.
Deep breath. You're going to do some heavy lifting here.
Yeah, that's a big one. I guess video games, I guess I can answer personally. Video games are a way for me to connect my interest and my love for computers and technology with my interest in creativity and the arts. Because I know a lot of people can do sort of digital art, or they can do, digital music. And I do that too, but I've only gotten there through video games. Like, I started with video games, and then because I was making video games, I had to indulge in these different types of, digital art and 3D modeling and composing music and doing sound design. And so I guess it was sort of like my gateway to this whole creative platform that basically didn't exist when I was born, which I think is super interesting. And there's also the interactivity portion of it, which is something that is something that video games do have above other art forms at this point in time, but I'm sure it's not going to be the ultimate in interactive media that we'll see in our lifetimes. And yeah, that's the best I can do for that one.